Our speaker today is Professor Arthur Dobrin. For some of you who know me intimately, I call Arthur Dobrin Dad. And he is our leader emeritus of this Ethical Humanist Society of Long Island and Professor Emeritus of University Studies at Hofstra University. He has written over 30 books, and he also has a blog, Psychology Today. Dad has really contributed so much to this society, including my little society, and he cares about humans. And what stands out for me is he doesn't need to do all that, but his love for people and his own village and trying his best to make this world a better place for all of us, for all those people who he will never even meet. I can read the blurb that I was given, or rather, which was in our website, but I will say about that, Arthur Dobrin. I met Arthur and his family in 2011 when he took us in, me and my 3 girls, because somehow we got in the United States, our paperwork, we're talking immigration, right? What is going on right now in this world? And Joe Schumann, for those who know Joe Schumann, Bergen County, says to Arthur, I have this family who needs a place to stay because their paperwork is taking long, and it will be a few weeks, maybe 2 months, maybe. 2 months down to 4 years, 4 years living with Arthur and Lynn Dobrin. And to be able to stand here today, this opening Sunday, for him to come and talk to us about finding hope. I am one of the hopes that was found. And it's really, truly a privilege to know him and Mom, Lynn, and his entire family. And he has helped me find hope over and over again. We stayed with Arthur and Lynn for 4 years till our paperwork was okay, and we were able to get our own little place and start a life in these United States. And I found hope when he told me about the Ethical Society, when they were talking by themselves. So this African Kenyan family, they are Christians. We need to find a way how we will get to their own church here and take us to church. And I confess, I say, I am so sorry, but we are not Christians. And that bond of them knowing, what? Hold on a minute. We don't have to split ourselves, take you to church and run to the society. And that's how I found the Ethical Humanist Society. It was just that hope of finding a safe haven for me and my girls. And then that hope of finding finally something to call what Father brought us up, knowing that we care for each other. What happens after we are gone? For the Kalenjins, where I come from, we go back to the ancestors. We don't worry about the future of that. We worry about the future of now. And so I found 2 hopes, and I found so many hopes amongst you guys that you took us in. I call this home because I truly found where I belonged. My hope is here. Dad, I'm humbled to welcome you to the podium, please.
Well, that was one of the best addresses that we've had at the Society in years. I have nothing to add to that. Well, thank you, Dory. Truly humbling. Thank you. This morning, before we began, somebody came in, David Alexander came in and said, Happy New Year. And most of us would say, well, what New Year are we talking about? The Jewish New Year, the secular New Year? No, what he was referring to was our New Year, in a sense, which is this is the beginning of our season. We don't really close our doors any longer, but we used to on some regular basis. Historical reason, which was that Felix Adler and the original founders of the ethical movement took a long summer hiatus. They had a house up in the he had a house up in the Adirondacks, and all the leaders and major contributors to the society would go up and spend some time with him figuring out how to solve the problems of the world. And then they resume again mid-September, and they would quit again in mid-May. We don't do that any longer, but we still think of our season as being September through the end of June. So this is the opening Sunday morning of our more formal gatherings. Sometime late June, each year we meet over at David Nallis's house, and we go through what we've done the previous season, what we're going to do for the upcoming year, and what theme do we want to have run through the Sunday mornings throughout September through June. This year, very much people said, with great enthusiasm, hope. We need to have the theme of hope this year. Because, obviously, which was unsaid, which is so many of us feel the lack of hope, how dispiriting the world is that we now live in. So the theme of hope made a great deal of sense to most of us, probably all of us. And that is the theme that we are going to ask all of our guest speakers this year and others to try to find in the addresses that they have here something that provides us, when we're at the end of the meeting, whatever it is the topic that they may address, that we feel more hopeful than we did before we came in, no matter how dire the circumstances might be. Where is the ray of hope that we find? So I was hoping that we would begin this morning by having the doors to the garden open, and we'd have somebody would stand by the entrance to the parking lot that would redirect everybody out to the garden. We would all gather out there, and all of us would then come into the room together in some celebratory way to mark the beginning of the new season. Well, Elaine told us that the weather in Florida was beautiful this morning. Unfortunately, for those of you who are not here in New York, I have to tell you that the weather here is not terrific. So we dispense with that. And here we're beginning in this room together. Plan B, if you would like, maybe next year. As I think Linda pointed out to us, every other Sunday, as far back as we could remember, the weather's been beautiful. Not this Sunday. So what we did begin with after our meditation is we always have a meditative piece of music. The music I chose this morning has words. It comes from an opera, but I chose to play it without the words and to read the words to you instead. And here is the words that really accompany that piece of music. High over the darkness, there shines a star. Through the gloom of silences, she watches you from heaven. And if all the other stars have faded, she will remain faithful and bright, and send through the night comfort and light, even in hardship. When darkness engulfs you, look up, and you will find her, the star. Her name is Hope. So that piece of music is the Star of Hope. It comes from an opera called Cinderella, which has rewritten the story of Cinderella so that it really presents a much more feminist point of view. It is looking for lost melody rather than the lost shoe. The Star of Hope is an opera that was written by Alma Deutscher, and it was premiered when she was 10 years old. Let me say that again. She wrote this opera, which was performed on stage professionally when she was 10 years old. She wrote it when she was 8. In 2019, when she was 14, there was a performance of her own music. All of it was performed that day at Carnegie Hall, is when she was 14 years old. She's gone on to write several more operas, is a conductor, and it has gone on to a career that has associated her with some of the premier musicians and composers of contemporary music. Really extraordinary. So that's what I wanted to begin with. A 10-year-old writing about hope in such a way that we could listen to it today and find in it inspiration. So the word hope, the star of hope. I found this morning in today's Newsday a headline which says, "The only hope we have left now." This is the only hope we have left now. That was the headline. And it was referring to cold cases, that is, people who've disappeared and have not been found in decades. And it focuses on trying to use DNA to find who are these remains that we have here in Nassau County, Suffolk County, and have not been identified. So somebody who says, one of my relatives has been missing for 2 decades, the only hope we have now to find out about their fate is through the DNA testing. That's one way of looking at hope. Another way of hearing hope is that it really is a very weak word. Well, I just hope that you will enjoy my talk this morning. It's a legitimate way to use the word hope, but it doesn't really have a great deal of strength. It is more like wishful thinking. However, if I have spent some time putting effort into what I'm going to say this morning, the hope that I have has a firmer foundation than simply waking up this morning and saying, okay, I'll talk about hope. No, there is effort that has gone into this, there's thought that's gone into this. Still, I don't know how you're going to react to my talk, so I hope that you will like it. It's a wish. It's a dream, if you like. Hope can be nothing more than pie in the sky. Having said that, it is one of the professional requirements of ministers, and I sometimes think of myself that way as being the spiritual minister or the guide or the clergy for this group here in the Ethical Society. It is a professional requirement of clergy that they're hopeful. Can you imagine going into any religious institution and when you leave, you said, oh my God, I feel horrible? It is a requirement, it's essential that the clergy provide you with a message of hope. If nothing else, that is what they must provide. Now, it can be packaged in many, many different ways. For some, the hope comes from being a believer, having faith in that religion. And it could be, I believe that I will go to heaven. If I have the proper faith, follow the proper rituals, I will go to heaven when this is all done. No matter how miserable my life may be here, I know when this is done, there's something better that's waiting for me. It can be the hope that someday, who knows when, the Messiah will arrive and will bring heaven here down to earth. Or the notion that I don't know why somebody has been suffering. I don't know why somebody's been maimed or killed in an accident, or why somebody who's lived such a wonderful life has had such misery and setbacks in theirs, but I really know that everything happens for a reason. So I don't understand what the reason is why I'm suffering, but I know that it really is for a good thing after all. Just believe that. Or the notion of karma, which is that at the end of this life, if you've lived a good one, there will be a better one waiting for you as you are reincarnated. So each religion presents something to the adherents, the devotees, something which gives them a sense of hope. But what if you don't believe that? What if you don't believe any of the things that other religions provide for you as a sense of comfort? I don't know if there's heaven or not, but I can't promise you that there is. I don't know if people if souls get reincarnated or not, but I can't promise you that if you lived a good life, you will be reincarnated. Logically impossible. So, if you don't believe it, where do you find hope? I would start by saying that hope isn't simply a mood or a feeling. It's something that is really rooted in what this world is. That is, it's rooted in reality. It is rooted in what we experience. It is rooted in how we understand what the facts are, what reality is. So I'll just give you a couple of quotes from people whose names you may or may not know that I find to me speak very directly as to the strong sense of what hope is. The first is from Václav Havel. He said, "Hope is the deep orientation of the human soul that can be held at the darkest times." That is, as we look deep inside of ourselves, we have an orientation to the world around us that we could hold on to in the darkest times. And then there's Seamus Henney, who said, "Hope is not optimism, which expects things to turn out well, but something rooted in the conviction that there is good worth working for." And when I put those two quotes together, I find something that is inspiring. That is, it is built upon, that is, hope is built upon the foundation of our ethical values and the principles that we hold. It is the belief or the faith that we can make a better world. It is possible for that to happen. That there is good to be found. There is good for us to express. There is a way for us to behave in this world that brings goodness to it. But that begs the question, which is, what do we mean by good? What is the goodness that we're talking about? Now, the founder of the ethical movement, Felix Adler, founded it in 1876, struggled with this question, trying to explore it as best he could from his Victorian philosophical, idealistic philosophy about what this was about. How do we bring the sense of meaning to this world? How do we find strength to go on? How do we face the tragedies in life that we will all experience? The last book he wrote, I believe it was the last book he wrote, which is really a compilation of his Sunday morning addresses, is called A Reconstruction of the Spiritual Ideal. And that's what he was after. He was after the sense of what is the ideal, not in the philosophical sense, although he did also hold on to that, but also in the sense of what is, if we can imagine the best world, what would that world be like? What would be our place in it? What will we have to do to help realize that ideal world? And for him, and I think this is the basis of the ethical movement ever since, it is the social and personal reconstruction that falls upon each of us in the relationships that we have with the people that we know, the people we don't know, and then in the social reconstruction, which is in the political world in which we all swim, whether we like it or not. Now, when Adler founded the ethical movement, again, it's like mid-19th century, what he was looking for was to find common ground amongst all the religions that surrounded him. He said, if you look beyond the theology, if you look beyond the questions that are beyond reason to know, he says, what they all have in common is trying to create a better world. And he said, let's join together. Let's leave aside those questions that are unanswerable, things that have divided us, that led us to kill each other. Leave them aside. Let's all join together and create a better world, founded upon ethics. This would be the ethical movement that he conceived of not as being ethical societies, discrete ethical societies, but he saw as being part of a broader movement which brought together people from all different religious backgrounds, Christians, Jews, and he founded something called the Free Religious Association, and he was the president of it for 10 years, from 1876 until 1870 something or other, 80 something. And during that time, he tried to bring together these disparate religions in the United States and some abroad. And it didn't happen. People kept to their own little silos, if you'd like. That's maybe a judgmental way of putting it, but they all remained in their own religious beliefs and institutions. One of the problems that I see with what Adler had done is that in 1876, when he looked around and said, well, let's find the common ground, the common ethical ground amongst us, he was still looking at the Western world, understandably. At that time, there really wasn't a great deal of cross-cultural fertilization, other than, let's say, Europe and America, or the various European cultures. But the idea that there were other places in the world that were sort of on the margins of the Western world, that really didn't factor into what he was doing. However, in 1889, the ethical leader of the Chicago Society, who then went on to become the leader of the Philadelphia Society, he wrote a book that was called Ethical Religion. What was interesting about ethical religion is that it got circulated in Europe, in the United States, and got some small following, but following amongst notable people. In 1907, living in South Africa was Mohandas Gandhi. Gandhi lived in South Africa for a number of years before he moved back to India. He was a lawyer in South Africa. I believe he was a lawyer. Gandhi came across Salter's book and then translated it into Hindi. It said that of all the things that it had influenced him in his thinking about what his background required of him was Salter's book, Ethical Religion. That book, although written by an ethical cultural leader, probably has had negligible, minuscule influence in the ethical movement, had enormous influence in world history. In 1893, in Chicago, was the Parliament of World Religions. And in that, several ethical cultural leaders participated. So by 1893, the notion of what was important for us expanded beyond the conventional borders of the Western world to now include religions outside of those borders. Didn't have much of an effect upon Felix Adler or ethical leaders, or if it did, it was really very subtle. It doesn't appear explicitly as far as I could see. But here's the next thread I would like to pick up here. And this is the thread of John Dewey. John Dewey becomes the premier American philosopher in the first part of the 20th century. John Dewey and Felix Adler were associates at Columbia University's Department of Philosophy. They had much in common, but they also had some serious philosophical disagreements. And because of those philosophical disagreements, John Dewey never joined the Ethical Culture Society. But he was a close friend, close associate. The people in Columbia knew all of the leaders, ethical culture leaders knew all of those people in the philosophy departments in Chicago, in New York, in Philadelphia. It was really, I wouldn't say a closely knit group, but it was groups in which people associated with each other on a regular basis. So let me talk about John Dewey. Because after Felix Adler dies in 1933, I think, John Dewey really becomes the philosophical foundation for the ethical culture movement. John Dewey, from 1919 to 1921, didn't live in the United States or in Europe. He lived in China. I thought this was a kind of an extraordinary move. He wasn't a missionary. He went to China because he had been invited by philosophy departments there to bring to China his philosophy of pragmatism, which had been the dominant philosophy in the United States at the time. So John Dewey first goes to Japan, spends a short time there, and then spends 2 full years in China. Now, if you look at people who are examining the history of philosophy in China, they talk about the enormous influence that John Dewey had upon Chinese philosophy. What's less written about is what impact did Chinese philosophy have upon John Dewey? And there is some things that are written about that. 10 years after his living in China, John Dewey writes a book called A Common Faith. Now, I think, as I read the material, what John Dewey finds in China was an expansive view of what he thought of as being the object of human living. That is, Confucianism in China focuses upon relationships. And what Dewey brings back from China is a strengthened notion that really what we really should be focusing upon here in our lives to find it meaningful is relationships. In addition to that, what Dewey brings back is the notion that it's not only the Western world that has insight into this. He brings back what he's learned from Chinese philosophy, from Chinese culture, brings it back, and I think subtly incorporates that into his ideas of a common faith. So let me read something from A Common Faith. The things in civilization we most prize are not ourselves. They exist by grace of the doings and sufferings of the continuous human community in which we are a link. Ours is the responsibility of conserving, transmitting, rectifying, very Confucius term, rectifying and expanding the heritage of values we received so that those who come after us may receive it in more solid and secure, more widely accessible, and more generously shared than we have received it. Here are all the elements for a religious faith that shall not be confined to sect, class, or race. Such a faith has always been implicitly the common faith of humankind. Now, he means that not simply from a Western point of view. He is bringing in an Asian point of view here, which is centered and focused upon human relationships. Now, I'd like to, oh my goodness, I'm speaking a lot longer than usual. Do we have a time limit here this morning? Do the men have, I know we have a men's lunch. Are you all going to start setting up at 12 o'clock, even if I'm only, so, okay. This is what happens when I don't speak regularly. I don't know how long things should be. All right. My point about Felix Adler and the foundations of the ethical movement is that it was culture bound. John Dewey expands that. So we're now looking at other cultures. John Dewey also understands from China the importance of historical roots and brings back the notion that fundamentally it's about the relationships that we have with one another. So looking at it from a cultural point of view, clearly we are seeds that are born in a particular soil that are nourished by a particular climate, social and otherwise. But it's a human seed. No matter how diverse we may be from another culture, we still are the seeds of human beings. These are not the seeds of a chimpanzee. They're not the seeds of a banana. Now, we all know that other cultures have different ways of doing things. So what is the common ground? Let me give you some examples of where things seem to be so different. It's like, how do we find common ground here? One is, how do you eat? When I was in Nairobi, first time I met my future daughter-in-law, who was Indian, we went to a restaurant, and I'm sitting next to her, and it's a nice restaurant that has plates and cutlery, and we're eating as things get served. And at some point, she turns to me and she says, "Do you mind if I eat with my fingers?" Now, can you imagine somebody in a restaurant here saying that? Do you mind if I picked up my, my potato with my fingers, or my mashed potatoes? All right, so, okay, that's trivial in a way. We all understand that there are different ways to eat. You could use a cutlery, you could use your fingers, or you could use chopsticks, the three basic ways. How about this? I have a conversation with one of my friends in Kenya about food. And I discover that once a year, he, as a young boy with his friends, go out and with a pan, and they sit by a tree and they wait for the termites to emerge. And as they do, they catch them, they pull off the wings, they put it in the pan to bring home most of them to fry up for dinner. But even before they even bring them all home, they choose to eat some because they're so delicious. He tells me this, and I said something like, I don't know if I said it out loud, I said, you must be kidding, right? You eat termites? Sure, he says. And then he says to me, I know that you eat something. I don't know what the name of it is, but it's on the floor of the ocean, and it has these horrible things, and it eats all the garbage on the bottom. And I said, do you mean a lobster? And he says, yeah, a lobster. How can you eat a lobster? It's disgusting. Well, a number of years after that, Lynn and I were traveling somewhere else, and we see a termite hive on the side of a tree. And we decide to stop. Somebody was driving us. We stopped. They said, "That's a termite mound, right?" "Yeah." He says, "Yes." I said, "Stop." "Why do you want to stop?" "Because we would like to try it." "What are you talking about? Nobody here eats termites." But we took a stick, put it into the termite hole, took out the termites that crawled onto it, picked off the termite, ate it. You all know what it tastes like, right? Everybody's going to say everything tastes like chicken. No, it did not. It did not taste like chicken. It tasted like carrots to me. I don't remember what Lynn thought. Let me give you a third example. The third example, again, of cultural differences is that when we were in Kenya, I understand that there was a group of people, diviners, who you have problems and you'd like to know what to do about the problem. You go see a diviner. So I said, well, that's really interesting, because I had just graduated from the Ackerman Family Institute in Family Therapy, and I said, gee, I'd like to know how they diagnose things. That'd be fascinating. So I arranged to go see, and I think I remember her name is Kamunto. I go see Kamunto, who's sitting in a hut, no lights on, and in it is a fire on the ground with three stones, very, very smoky, and she's in there making strange noises. Finally, I'm invited in with the person who asked me to come, who does the translating for me. She didn't know English or Swahili, so she translates. So here's the process. She says, as she begins to ask me questions that are pretty much yes, no. And as she discards the ones that really don't work, she focuses on the ones that do, and she ultimately finds out that sometime Lynn had a bicycle accident. Sometimes my children are awakened at night with nightmares, and sometimes we have lightning around our house. How'd you get to that? By asking a million yes-no questions. That's what she finally came up with. Well, that was an interesting thing, interesting process. But then it's like, so what am I going to do about it? That's only the diagnosis. What's the prescription? The prescription was, you need to sacrifice goats and cows for your community and have a community feast. That will dispel all of the bad stuff, all the bad aura around you. And then I said to her, well, it's not my custom. We don't do that. And her response essentially was, shrugging of the shoulders, that's your problem, not mine. So we could think of eating termite, we could think of the fingers as being repulsive, eating with your fingers is repulsive. Eating termites is disgusting. And going to a diviner who's going to tell you what to do about some of your problems as being primitive. I don't think about any of them that way. Why not even the last one, which sounds ridiculous from our point of view? Well, one of the reasons it's not so ridiculous is because of one is a placebo effect, which is that we know for certain kinds of problems that people have, sleeplessness, for example, insomnia, that there's a placebo effect. You could tell them almost anything, and it works, maybe 50% of the time. And for other kinds of ailments, placebo works 50%. Now, so if you come in believing the diviner and you believe that this is going to work, there's a good chance, some chance, that in fact it will work for you. The other reason, and I think the more powerful one, is the prescription, not the diagnosis. The prescription is go back to your community. Be involved with the people who are there. These are the people who support you. You sacrifice something to them to show them how grateful you are for the support that you get from them. This is almost the message of family therapy. Okay? So we know all of these differences amongst us. Where's the commonality? The commonality is that those are social conventions. That is, you could imagine doing it differently and it will be just as good for you. You can imagine eating with chopsticks instead of a knife and fork, and that's fine. You can imagine eating termites instead of the very wasteful beef that we eat, and it's bad for the environment. You can imagine termites are very full of protein. And you can imagine that if you really believe something that somebody's telling you, which gets you back into the community that perhaps you've been estranged from, works. So those are social conventions. Now, it's already 10 to 12, I'm sorry. If your backside hurts, as mine would at this point, that's okay. Just squirm a little. What I want to look at is three traditions that aren't the Western, two that aren't the Western world and one that is ours. Just going to do this briefly. I want to look at South Asia. South Asia has a basic framework in understanding how the world works that could be described as Dharma. And these are the Dharma religions of Jain, Hindu, Buddha, and Sikh. They all have a very common framework of how they look at the world. Of course, there's tremendous diversity amongst them. But fundamentally, here's, excluding the outliers, it is based, all of these are based on the notion of do no harm, do not engage in violence, and be compassionate. That's South Asia. If we look at East Asia, what we find in the Confucianist framework fundamentally is a network. You are as part of a network of relations. And in those relationships, there are mutual obligations. And those obligations are reciprocal. We are all linked to one another. Those are two different ways of looking at the world. And we have a third in the Western world, which we could perhaps encapsulate as the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment is, it is the sanctity of the individual that leads us to the whole notion of personal freedom. So under that, we would then have human rights, social justice, the Bill of Rights in our Constitution, Patients' Bill of Rights in all of the hospitals. But each of these approaches has its limitations, ours included. In South Asia, the limitation is when you focus on liberation from suffering, the key is detachment from the material world. That's what's causing all the aggravation. So the limitation is, by and large, it is a lack of engagement with social structures, political structures, if you'd like. East Asia, with its emphasis upon social harmony and respect, has the limitation that the individual is often lost in static relationships and which become ritualized. And you could see this if you watch any series on streaming or elsewhere that come from South Korea or Japan, where people are constantly bowing, bowing, bowing. And in the West, the emphasis upon the individual leads to selfishness, self-centeredness, alienation, and loneliness. So each of them has its positive and its negatives. Now, we live in a world today I would describe as being chaotic, cruel, and corrupt. And we don't know what the future is going to be, which takes me back to hope, where I began. Hope, as Václav Havel said, is the deep orientation of the human soul that can be held in the darkest times. Or as Seamus Heaney said, it is something rooted in the conviction that there is good worth working for. And I began with Alma Deutscher's music. She says, as she continues to compose music now in her early 20s, she says, we need new music which speaks to people, which moves them, which inspires them, which provides them with solace, which entertains them, which brings beauty to their lives. I find that all of this is the motivation for us to use the pathways that are personal, social, and political. I think that ethical humanism is a universal philosophy, despite the differences in social conventions which we could all pull up. It's a universal philosophy of values and virtues which can be ascribed to anywhere by anyone who is concerned with making the world a better place. This, I find, is the groundwork for hope, inspiration, strength, and the antidote to despair. So, my final words. Can I sum this up and put it on a poster? Everybody has all the memes that you see on Facebook, and I love some of them. So is it possible for us to do that? Here's what I've come up with. All of this is always a work in progress. It's always a process. But here's where I am in the process this morning. Everyone is connected to everything. Everyone is the center of their universe. There is no me without you. My best is uniquely mine, and your best is uniquely yours. My best is elicited when I seek to elicit the best in you. Deeds are more important than creeds. What harm I do to others, I also do to myself. I thrive best when the world is in harmony. I am a steward of this good earth. Be kind, be fair, be generous, and be open.